Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Ford Championship Weekend in Homestead-Miami Speedway. Appreciate you all being here. For those of you who have traveled all year, we thank you. We thank your editors, your producers, everyone. The fans have certainly been well served by this group all season long. So appreciate that. We're pleased today to be joined by NASCAR Chairman and Chief Executive Officer Brian France. Thank you for making the time, Brian. If you could start out and just give us an assessment of the season to date and hear what we can expect on Championship Weekend.
Well, first, I wanted to welcome back Holly Kane. I know she's had a few things go on, so I wanted to make sure that I said hello, Holly. And let me just say, first, welcome to South Florida Ford Championship Weekend. We'll settle all the three divisions here. Of course, the big one on Sunday. We're very excited about it, as you would expect us to be. The four drivers, that, including Jeff Gordon, are storybook endings in their own right. So that's been exciting. The level of competition that the chase format has delivered has exceeded everything we could have expected. I say that because of the intense moments that have been created, the performances that are undeniable, that are happening primarily because the stakes are higher on any given weekend, and you're seeing the drivers and the teams react to that. And what that means is the level, the intensity, the talent of the drivers is all on full display. And I think you'll see that on Sunday, as you did last year. It's probably going to get down to you have to win the race, not only beat the other three. Be surprised if that isn't the case. Who knows? So we're very excited. Let me make a quick mention of the weather down here in South Florida, which has been well discussed, and we have a record number of Air Titans on site, as well as track drying systems, jet dryers and alike. They have served us well, by the way, and Martinsville would not have happened without the Air Titan technology. Phoenix, for that matter, even though it didn't go the full length, would not have happened without that technology. It's making a huge difference, and I suspect that sometime during the weekend it will be called on to make another difference as well. We are going to go through the weekend as we traditionally would, looking at all of our options, trying to get all of the laps in a given race in on a certain day, on race day. That's been our policy and philosophy. We go further and try harder, I think, than any other motorsport division to accomplish that, because we want it to be settled on the track, but shorten races, and therefore consequences of that are part of racing. They're part of the game, and I hope it doesn't play into it, but it's possible. We'll do everything we can to sort that out as Friday night, tonight, Saturday, and Sunday roll forward. And with that, I'm happy to answer any other specific questions.
We have handheld mics. We ask you to please state your name and affiliation, and we'll go for about 28 minutes. We'll start right over here with Jordan Bianchi, and then go to Lee Spencer.
Jordan Bianchi, SBNation.com. Brian, going back to your meeting with Matt Kenseth last week, can you take me behind the impetus for that? Was that solely because of the comments he made to the Associated Press?
No, we were very disappointed, as you know, with what happened in Martinsville. We reacted to that. We were coming down here to a championship weekend, and I wanted to make sure that that matter was behind us with Matt, with Joe Gibbs, and so on. I'm assured that it is. And we had a good conversation about what had happened and what the thinking was, or whatever you want to call Matt's actions. And we talked about that, and it was a good conversation. Those happen, though. Those kind of conversations happen with us more frequently than not. So that's not a surprising thing. And I felt good coming out of those meetings.
Lee Spencer, and then Tom Jensen and Bob Pockris.
Lee Spencer, motorsport.com. Just a question about Sunday. There was a lot of discussion at yesterday's media gathering about where the line is and at what point will NASCAR draw the line when it comes to what possibly could happen to determine the champion on Sunday. Generally, either Hoots or you or Mike, someone gets up in the meeting, drivers meeting on Sunday, and says where that line is, but the drivers didn't seem to quite know where it is at this point. Could you please define?
I'm happy to. I'm actually glad you asked that question. Do you know how many drivers have come to see Richard Buck in the last 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks? Zero. Zero drivers have asked us for a clarification on the so-called line. And the reason that they don't ask is they know. And they know that circumstances late in the race, blocking, although I'm not a fan of blocking, that's part of racing. Blocking, contact, the short end of some of those exchanges that happen are all part of it, and do not look to NASCAR to deal with that. They are part of racing. And so the line is that if you intentionally, beyond part of racing, and there's contact and who came up, who came down, who was more aggressive than somebody else, and so on. If somebody is just intentionally bonsaiing into some situation with the sole, purpose of taking somebody out, we'll deal with that. We dealt with that in Martinsville, as a matter of fact. We'll deal with that at all times. But what is unmistakable is our brand of NASCAR, our style of NASCAR, has been this way for decades. There's always been, and I even go back to just last year in Texas. We had a perfectly, what I always call quintessential moments in NASCAR, where Jeff Gordon needs to win in Texas at the time, and Brad Keselowski makes an aggressive move. A lot of people thought he shouldn't have done it. He came splitting down the middle, lots of contact. Jeff Gordon gets the short end of that particular exchange, probably cost him a shot at the championship last year. That's part of NASCAR. Were we going to react to that? Of course not. We're not going to react to anything that's part of the traditional part of hard, aggressive racing. There is going to be contact. I always expect it. I don't expect people to turn people around. That's not what we mean when we say contact. But sometimes it happens, and sometimes somebody comes down and blocks, and they assume that there's going to be a nice person that's just going to go, oh, okay. And sometimes there's not. And then when there's not, they may go around themselves. That can happen. Lots of things can happen when there's really hard racing and contact going on. And NASCAR will officiate the way we've always done that. That's why there's been zero, I want to say that, zero drivers walk in and say, can you ask me, can we talk about where the line is? They know exactly where the line is.
All right, we go to Tom, and then Bob, and then George Diaz.
Hi, Brian. Tom Jensen, FoxSports.com. Given the success that you've had with the Chase in the Sprint Cup Series, what are the likelihood of it being adopted for Xfinity and for the Camping World Truck Series next year?
Well, Tom, it won't be exact, that's for sure. But, it has been successful. And our partners in Xfinity and Camping World would like us to explore what's possible to have their own version of it, and we're going to look at that. We'll look at that in the off season. We have looked at that before, haven't quite found the perfect thing for each one of those divisions, but we'll look at it. It's worth looking at.
Thank you.
Bob Pockris, ESPN. It came out back in the spring that Jane Randall of No More has been consulting with NASCAR on domestic violence issues. What has been her role, and what specific things have you done as a result of her recommendations over the past year and with the Kurt Busch situation and since?
Well, we have a lot of people that we have either formally that we consult with, sometimes informally. It goes all the way down our organization with anything that's as important as domestic violence. We're going to seek input and information from a lot of different places, including Jane, which we have in the past. I've met with her myself. She's been helpful. and we'll continue. That's an evolving issue in sports and in our society, and we'll continue to be really, really, careful of how we look at that.
And is there anything that she's recommended that you specifically put into?
Well, I don't want to go through what anybody's recommended specifically. She's given us some really good input on how, more of how to look at things, about how do you prioritize certain circumstances that we might think are not important, but they're very sensitive in the scheme of domestic violence. So she's got us to look through a different lens, and that's been helpful.
Yeah, George Diaz, Orlando Sentinel, up here, Brian. Are you satisfied with the current dynamics and format of the chase? We know you guys have tinkered with it in years past. Are you happy with the way things are?
I think the only thing I can say is we're thrilled. We're just thrilled with, and we're thrilled because of one reason, not because of one incident or another or one situation. It's because we know that it's raising the level of competition. Drivers, teams, not just drivers, are trying things, being aggressive, and achieving things they never thought possible. Kevin Harvick told me that last year at the awards ceremony in Las Vegas. And he said, one of the neat things is I didn't know we could be this good. I didn't know we could, when we had to win, because there's a little thing in auto racing that you say, well, everything's out of my control, and there's 42 other teams out there, and it doesn't work that way. Well, it turns out it can work that way. And in this new format, it has to work that way, or you're probably not going to move on or have an opportunity to win the title. That's been the best thing I have seen. We've said this internally a lot, because we obviously are very, very careful at looking at how everything is playing out. And I was talking to Mike Helton the other day. I said, this might be the best thing we could have ever done for the quality of racing that we've ever done. And he said, I think you're right. And we both kidded ourselves, because he and I both were the ones that were, believe it or not, against going forward with this format for a number of years, of advancing it to a elimination and winner-take-all scenario. But we got exactly what we want, which is great racing. Obviously, when you get great racing, you're going to get great moments. We love great moments, as anybody in sports does. But more importantly, the thrill of watching the teams elevate to do things, achieve things. And I see it on pit road. It's not just what the driver does. They're taking chances, their strategies, their preparation. And obviously, the drivers are doing things. There's a reason why that they're almost every week, the chase drivers are at the top of the leaderboard, and I suspect that'll be that way this weekend.
Now let's go to Claire B. Lang, Jeff Gluck, and Lewis Frank.
Claire B. Lang, Sirius XM NASCAR Radio. You were talking about being slow to come to this, to have this chase format, and now loving it. And I think most of the drivers really like it, even though they understand the challenges of it and the intensity of it. The question is, when you guys made the decision to go with this format, obviously you tried to vet out everything, like the rain we talked about like a week ago, or
I didn't try to vet out the rain. I was pretty good.
exactly. But to decide it, if you'd come to that with rain, that makes an impact on it, or what happened with Matt Kenseth and Joey Logano, certainly you had to have seen that coming. Are you under the vision that this format pushes that to happen, and that you guys did talk about all this?
Look, any format, the answer is probably yes. I think you're right. It's gonna push drivers to take more chances, i.e. Brad Keselowski last fall in Texas is a good example of that. To try things, to have to do things, that only makes racing better. When drivers are going at their best, trying their hardest, taking chances and doing amazing things, that's what our fans love. That we have to understand that. And so does it create more moments where some drivers get the short end of that, like Matt did, and Matt got the absolute, lousy end of a NASCAR exchange. as did Jeff Gordon and as did a number of other drivers. That happens, but that's happened all the time. Now, though, when it happens, it's true that, it's spotlighted because one driver, may get to move on, another doesn't. So the consequences are higher, and we get that, we understand that. But that's not going to change, how we officiate races. It's not going to change how we're not going to. I don't like blocking, and I don't care for it myself. But that's part of NASCAR racing. That's part of it. And we're not going to take certain things out of NASCAR racing because they're going to contribute to, more or less contact or whatever else. It happens the way it happens. We officiate the way we've always done. We have a very clear line, very clear about exactly where things are, where they need to be. And when they are not, we will step in and we will deal with it. And the second part of that is, I've heard a lot about, you should be more consistent with your calls. And because if I knew that, then I wouldn't have done this. And we don't always explain it this way, but we issue penalties for two reasons. One is we want to penalize you for what we think you did poorly or wrong. That's the small end of the penalty. We're not the justice system for the country here, right? We're just an auto racing, we're a race series, right? What we really want to do is make sure you don't do it in the future. We want to deter it from happening in the future. So if we're running along with calling a certain rule or a certain infraction or a certain situation each way the same time, and we keep getting the same results, well, drivers don't care, they'll just go ahead and do it, then you can expect us to lift up that particular penalty, which is exactly what we did with Matt Kenseth, exactly what we did. Because we saw what was coming, which is an escalation. If somebody doesn't like my definition, and I run the sport, what is part of the game of racing, well, I'll just go get even this way or that way. We have to ask ourselves, well, where does that end? Do I say, well, he disabled my car while it was sitting on pit, being cute here, but I hit the car because that guy 2 weeks ago spun me out, cost me a chance at this or that. NASCAR didn't rule on it. I'm going to invoke some rule or whatever else. So I'm going to plow into his car while it's sitting on the starting grid. I won't hurt anybody, and I'll just have gotten even. But I'll just have disabled his car, and how about that? No, this is what we have to think about. We have to think about where does it end if we don't step in and make sure that when there's something that's happened, like in Martinsville, I know I'm spending a lot of time on this because I want this, as we go forward, to not be such a big deal about, how we reacted or what happened. It's going to happen in the future. There's going to be contact. There's going to be drivers that get in the short end, whatever. We're going to always deal with that. And we're going to look towards escalation. We're going to look towards deterrence. We're going to have an eye on consistency, but we're not going to ignore something that we think is not a deterrent. So I know I gave you a long answer and probably not exactly equated to your question, but that's where we are.
Go to Jeff Gluck, Louis Frank, and Nate Ryan.
Jeff Gluck from USA Today. Brian, I know you touched on the rain earlier when you started, and the possibility of ending an elimination race or a championship race early. But when so much comes down to it on these races, what's the argument, aside from, this is the policy and this is in the rule book, what's the argument against changing that or trying to do something to run all the laps when so much is on the line? Baseball recently changed the rule to make sure that all World Series games are completed, even if they have to come back the next day. What prevents you guys from going down that road?
Well, there are a lot of things, and but are we having those kind of conversations? Of course, we're trying to think through what would be the best way to do it, knowing our longstanding rule is, after the halfway point of completion, it's a completed event. We typically, want to come away on race day with whoever watched the race, watched the event, saw the conclusion of that event. and that's if you're over 50%. And we also take, it's not lost on us all the benefits that could happen if we elected to want to complete every lap. We understand that. And then we look at lots of other things that can come into play on that. You know, how long do we sit down here in South Florida with our media partners, et cetera, et cetera. Baseball can get going relatively quickly once the rain has stopped. We can be a little longer or a lot longer in certain cases. There's a whole safety element that we have to, you know, deal with and so on. But we're looking at everything. Our view now is that, like a lot of things that aren't necessarily, you know, perfect, so to speak, that's part of the game. That's part of racing. That, it's part of the strategy. You saw that last weekend in Phoenix. That you have to anticipate, weather as being a factor in deciding things, as unfortunate as that is. Hopefully it won't be a factor on Sunday.
Louis Frank, Nate Ryan, and Jenna Fryer.
Louis Frank, Reuters. Jeff Gordon's on-track record speaks for itself, but how did his evolution impact the growth and perception of NASCAR in a wider audience?
Well, I asked him recently, a while back, about, what made you go on Saturday Night Live, and how do you, what made you want to, number one, he said, well, they asked me, and I said, well, okay. But he said, look, I felt comfortable doing a lot of things, that were not mainstream for a NASCAR driver, and he was smart about it. He knew that, that could separate him from other drivers, and he was good at it. And he, he's one of those guys. I always look back at drivers that have, are going to, take out a lot less than they put in. He's one of those guys that is put in a lot to row the sport. And other drivers should think about that a little bit, because he's really a model in that respect. A lot of respect for Jeff Gordon.
Nate Ryan, Jenna Fryer, and then John.
Nate Ryan, NBC Sports. Brian, next year marks a pretty pivotal point for NASCAR going long-term because of the expiration of two components, Sprint title sponsorship and fifth and final year of the industry action plan. If you could, those things I think are fairly inextricably linked. If you could maybe just give us a snapshot of where you see it going on both of those fronts, title sponsor, and what does the sport need to do in terms of attracting more youth and broader audiences, because I know that was the goal of the industry action plan. Do you feel like it's been successful, and do you feel like you need to do more on that front, or do you have plans to maybe develop a new 5-year plan?
I think the industry action plan was always a floor to let everybody else stand on top of and do a lot within the industry, drivers, teams, tracks, and so forth. We were the floor, the kind of foundation, but the tracks and the industry. And by the way, we did a lot of that. We were, coming in and out of the big hard recession in 09 and 10 and so on. And so they've all done what we've hoped that they would do and we'll see where a lot of them have gotten legs beyond what we could have even wanted, or not wanted, we could have foreseen. And then the Sprint replacement is going, as we would expect it to, and as we thought it would, and we're being careful, and it's a big commitment for us. It's a big commitment for somebody else. To be partners with us is not the normal marketing partnership. This is an actual somebody who's entitled into your sport, and so we're going to be careful to get the right partner. And we've got, we're through next year. It doesn't hit us until 2017, so we want to be careful. And whenever we have something on that, we will of course announce it to this group.
Good. Jenna, and back to John.
Jenna Fryer, AP. I have two questions kind of related. In your definition of contact and hard racing, this came up yesterday with the 4 contenders, and all of them seem to defer that they might wreck each other for the championship. if two of them are running nose to tail and one of them is blocking, is the expectation for the guy in second place to move him and win the championship?
Well, my expectation is that nobody would wreck anybody. My expectation is nobody would ever block either. What they do is it doesn't take any talent to block, but it takes you're risking to block. So we won't know until it happens who was blocking, who came down, hoping somebody would not, would be a good Samaritan and pull their foot off the throttle. That can happen. Gentlemen drivers exist. I don't see one of those four guys remaining. And if there's contact, and it's and they're going for position. And by the way, it's not always that somebody just turns somebody around. A lot of times, there's some really good gentleman drivers that have had a lot of success, and they don't want to have any contact. You know why? Because they don't want to be on the other end of it, and not down the road either. They don't want to be, having some contact, and both of them go around. That happens a lot. So you'll see certain drivers, and they have tremendous success, that even if they should, in a certain situation, sort of move somebody around a little bit, they won't even try. They just won't, because that's not their style of racing. We've got all styles that exist. And for the gentleman drivers who want to be a finesse driver, that's great. We've had some of our best drivers with great records have achieved a lot. Then we have Dale Earnhardt's and Rusty Wallace's, and we've had drivers that just, that were much more aggressive. Brad Keselowski falls into that category for sure. And Logano probably is. And these four guys are all, guys that have a little of both probably. So I don't know what will happen, but contact late in the race, that's just part of it. And we got to have an understanding of that, and not, be so surprised when that happens in a NASCAR race. That has happened in our entire history. We weren't, when Kansas happened, we're very disappointed for Matt, because he got obviously the real short end of that exchange. But as a NASCAR racing incident, that happens all the time.
Let's go back to John.
I had one more, sorry.
Quickly.
In the aftermath of Kansas, many people debated on how Joey maybe could have handled it differently. Is there anything that you or NASCAR could have done? Because one of the things that Matt said was he felt encouraged to retaliate by your comments, and he believed it was one of the very few times that NASCAR did not sit a pair of feuding drivers down to try to smooth it out.
Well, obviously, if I would have thought that would have helped, we would have definitely sat him down. We didn't think anything of it at that point. What was said afterwards and done at Talladega and all that sort of happened. We didn't think anything of it. Frankly, it was as I said, quintessential thing that happens in NASCAR. I said it was a very smart decision or move, that strategy-wise, that Joey did to take a 6-time winner and the hottest team in NASCAR and put them on the outside of the chase looking in. That's smart. But if he misunderstood that, it's by no means any more than I thought Jeff Gordon. Well, I was very disappointed for Jeff last fall in Texas. And I think I praised Brad Keselowski at the time, because it was an absolute daring, great move that didn't work out for Jeff Gordon. But that's quintessential NASCAR. Late in the race, and wham, they're going at it and doing things. That is us. We got to all understand that's us. That's what we do. That's what those guys do. And some of them don't do it that way. And we respect those drivers and that style and another style of racing. You don't have to have an aggressive style in NASCAR. There's plenty of others that don't. And if we could, but look, I know I'm giving you a long answer. If we could have sat, if I would have known that would have helped, we would have, of course, sat him down.
We're going to go John, Dustin, and wrap it up over here with Chris Knight.
Thanks. John Oriovitz, ESPN.com. Brian, when you introduced the phrase quintessential NASCAR into the vocabulary of the fans after Kansas, a lot of people, it seems up to and including Matt Kenseth, kind of viewed it as a flashpoint in this chase. Do you have any regrets about the quintessential remark, and do you think it actually had an impact on what happened on the track?
Well, based on what I've said in the last 20 minutes, I said the same thing. I don't know if I use the word quintessential, but after Texas, I keep going back to that because it's fresh in my mind. But there are plenty of other incidents going back to the Daytona 500 back in whatever year it was when Petty and Pearson were notoriously, ramming it. Somebody got the short end of that. Somebody went around. Both of them went around. And so some of our greatest finishes have involved contact. And sometimes, not always, that somebody will get the short end of that. And we have, to my knowledge, have never made a call in a racing incident like that. And if something so egregiously obvious that somebody wasn't trying to just have a hard racing moment, but they're literally just trying to take something, we will obviously deal with that. That is a line. We'll deal with that.
Dustin and Chris.
Dustin Long, NBC Sports. Brian, 3 times since 2012, fans have been injured at a restrictor plate event when a vehicle has gotten up into the fence, a truck, Xfinity, and then Austin Dillon's crash this year. You made the change at Talladega with the green-white checker, reducing that to 1. What are things that NASCAR is looking at for next year in regards to the plate races in terms of safety? And in each of those instances, the fence certainly chewed up the vehicles. Is there some things with new fence technology that can further protect the fans, but also further protect the competitors so their cars don't go like they're going through a cheese grater?
There is. And I'm a big believer in innovation, and most of you know that. And I think innovation solves so many things, not everything, and not as fast as you want it, but I know the tracks are working on different technology that would support the fence. We feel pretty good about the technology, although it's a work in progress with the race cars themselves. But it's true that the fence we think can obviously be improved beyond, and it's always evolving. And I suspect the tracks will come with technology that, as soon as they can, that will be an asset there. But I know they're working on that.
Chris Knight, to wrap it up.
Chris Knight, HMS.com. Brian, over the last couple of years, we've seen the Xfinity field reduced from 43 to 40, the truck field reduced from 36 to 32. Is there any plans to maybe keep that system going and maybe see the Cup field reduced or maintained to 43 cars?
No, not right this moment. But I mean, look, anything that we do to reduce a field is designed to make, racing better in some form or fashion. We're fit the times of today a little bit smarter, and we don't have a plan yet, but we'll always look at that if it's smart. Thank you all.
Thank you, Brian.
Okay,
Thanks,
thank you
everyone.
all.